The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered clapboard building, and Yates Morrison knew immediately that something was wrong when the driver climbed down with unusual haste, his weathered face creased with concern. It was the third week of September in 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Benton, Montana territory, turning the dusty Main Street into a shimmering haze. Yates had been waiting at the stage depot for over an hour, his worn leather hat pulled low against the glare, his heart hammering with a mixture of anticipation and dread that he had not felt since the war ended 17 years ago. He was 35 years old, owner of a modest cattle ranch 10 miles outside of town, and until 6 months ago, he had resigned himself to a life of solitude. Then he had answered that advertisement in the newspaper. A matrimonial agency back east, promising companionship for lonely men on the frontier. He had written 3 letters before receiving a response from Beatrice Vaughn of Philadelphia, a woman of 24 who claimed to be a seamstress seeking a fresh start in the West. Her letters had been thoughtful and kind, with a gentle humor that made him smile during long winter evenings by the fire. They had exchanged photographs, his showing a tall, lean man with serious dark eyes, and her revealing a slender young woman with auburn hair and a tentative smile. Now she was here, and the driver was shouting for the doctor. Yates pushed through the small crowd gathering around the stage, his boots kicking up clouds of dust. "I am Yates Morrison," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I am here for Miss Vaughn." The driver, a grizzled man named Henderson whom Yates had known for years, met his eyes with a grave expression. "She is in a bad way, Morrison. Been sick the whole journey from Helena. Fever, coughing, something terrible. I tried to get her to stay behind and rest, but she insisted on coming through." Yates did not wait for permission. He climbed into the coach and found her huddled in the corner, wrapped in a traveling cloak despite the heat. Even through the fever flush on her cheeks, he could see she was beautiful, more delicate than her photograph had suggested. Her auburn hair was damp with perspiration, plastered to her forehead, and her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. "Miss Vaughn," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "My name is Yates Morrison. I am here to take you home." Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing gray eyes clouded with illness. "Mr. Morrison," she whispered, and he could hear the rattle in her chest. "I apologize for my condition. The journey was more difficult than I anticipated." "Do not speak," he said, already calculating the fastest way to get her medical attention. "Save your strength." He lifted her easily despite her protests, cradling her against his chest as he stepped down from the coach. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel the heat of her fever through the layers of clothing. The crowd parted as he carried her across the street toward Dr. Thornton's office, Henderson hurrying ahead to open the door. Dr. Samuel Thornton was a competent physician who had served in the Union Army alongside Yates. He took one look at Beatrice and immediately cleared his examination table, gesturing for Yates to lay her down. "How long has she been like this?" "The driver says she has been sick since Helena," Yates replied, stepping back to give the doctor room to work. Thornton began his examination, checking her pulse and listening to her breathing with his stethoscope. Beatrice drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words that Yates could not quite make out. After several tense minutes, the doctor straightened and pulled Yates aside. "Pneumonia," Thornton said quietly. "Pretty advanced, too." The journey out here in those cramped, dusty stage coaches could not have helped. She needs rest, fluids, and careful monitoring. The next few days will be critical. Yates felt his chest tighten. What are her chances? Hard to say. She is young, and that works in her favor, but she is also severely weakened from travel. She will need constant care." Thornton paused, studying Yates with keen eyes. "I heard you were expecting a mail-order bride. Is this her?" "Yes." "Well, she cannot travel to your ranch in this condition, and she certainly cannot stay alone at the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher runs a decent establishment, but she does not have the time or knowledge to provide the level of care this young woman needs." Yates understood what the doctor was suggesting. "I can care for her at my ranch. I nursed wounded soldiers during the war. I know what needs to be done." Thornton nodded slowly. "I know you do. But Morrison, you understand the impropriety of the situation. An unmarried woman staying at your ranch." "She came here to marry me," Yates said firmly. "We can have Reverend Mitchell perform the ceremony right now if it puts propriety to rest." "She is in no condition to consent to marriage," Thornton replied. "Let me suggest an alternative. Take her to your ranch and care for her. I will come by every other day to check on her progress. If anyone in town gossips, I will make it clear that she is under medical quarantine, and you are acting as her nurse under my supervision. Once she recovers, she can make her own decision about the marriage with a clear head." It was a sensible plan, though Yates felt a strange disappointment at the delay. He had allowed himself to hope, to imagine a future with this woman he had never met, and now that future hung in the balance, dependent on her surviving the next few days. "Agreed," he said. "What supplies will I need?" Thornton spent the next 20 minutes providing detailed instructions and gathering medicines, tinctures, and clean bandages. Yates listened carefully, committing everything to memory. By the time they were finished, Beatrice had been made as comfortable as possible, wrapped in clean blankets with a cool compress on her forehead. Yates carried her to his wagon, which he had brought specifically for this occasion, imagining it filled with her trunks and belongings. Henderson had already loaded her modest luggage, just 2 cases and a carpet bag, onto the back. As Yates settled Beatrice on a bed of blankets he had prepared in the wagon bed, she opened her eyes again. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "To my ranch," he replied gently. "You are very sick, Miss Vaughn. You need rest and care, and I aim to provide both." "I am sorry," she whispered, tears sliding down her fevered cheeks. "I wanted to make a good impression." Something shifted in Yates's chest, a tenderness he had not felt in years. He brushed a strand of damp hair from her forehead. "You already have," he said. "Now rest." The journey to his ranch took over an hour, and Yates drove carefully, trying to avoid the worst of the ruts in the road. His property was not grand, just a simple 2-room cabin he had built himself, a barn for his horses and small herd of cattle, and a chicken coop that provided eggs. The land stretched out in rolling hills covered with prairie grass, bounded by a creek that ran year-round. It was peaceful and isolated, which had suited him fine when he lived alone. Now, as he carried Beatrice into his home, he saw it through new eyes and found it wanting. The cabin was clean but sparse. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. His bedroom was separated by a curtain hung from the ceiling. He had planned to add a proper second bedroom once Beatrice arrived, had already purchased the lumber and stored it in the barn. Now he cursed himself for not completing the work sooner. He settled her in his bed, the only real bed in the house, and set about building up the fire even though the day was warm. Thornton had stressed the importance of keeping her comfortable, not allowing her to become chilled when the fever broke and she began to sweat. Yates fetched water from the well, put a pot on to boil, and began preparing the first of many medicinal teas according to the doctor's instructions. As the sun set and the cabin filled with shadows, Yates pulled a chair beside the bed and began his vigil. Beatrice tossed and turned, mumbling in her delirium. He bathed her face and neck with cool water, coaxed her to drink when she was lucid enough, and listened to the harsh sound of her breathing. The first night was the worst. Her fever spiked just after midnight, and for a terrible hour, Yates thought he might lose her. He stripped away the heavy blankets, sponging her down with cool water, whispering words of encouragement that he doubted she could hear. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, the fever broke slightly and she fell into a deeper, more natural sleep. Yates dozed in his chair, jerking awake every time her breathing changed, every time she stirred. As dawn light filtered through the windows, he stood and stretched his aching back, then set about preparing breakfast and more medicine. This became his routine. Days blurred into each other, marked only by Dr. Thornton's visits and the gradual, almost imperceptible improvement in Beatrice's condition. Yates neglected his cattle and let his hired hand, a young man named Timothy who lived in a small cabin on the far edge of the property, handle the essential chores. He barely left Beatrice's side, learning the rhythm of her illness, becoming attuned to every change in her breathing, every shift in her fever. On the 4th day, she woke with clear eyes for the first time. Yates was at the stove, preparing broth from a chicken he had butchered that morning. He heard her stir and turned to find her looking around the cabin with confusion but awareness. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice hoarse but coherent. He was at her side in 3 strides, kneeling beside the bed. "I am here. How do you feel?" "Terrible," she admitted, managing a weak smile. "But better than before, I think. How long have I been here?" "For days. You have been very ill." She looked down at herself, at the nightgown she wore that had belonged to his mother, and color rose in her pale cheeks. "You have been caring for me." "I have. Dr. Thornton has been checking on you regularly. We had little choice in the matter. You could not travel, and there was no one else in town equipped to provide the necessary care." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, her fingers plucking at the quilt. "I am sorry to have put you in this position. I am sure this is not what you expected when you sent for a bride." Yates sat back on his heels, studying her face. Even pale and weakened by illness, she was lovely. But more than that, there was something in her eyes, a quiet strength that called to him. "I expected a partner," he said honestly. "Someone to share my life with. That has not changed." "You do not even know me," she whispered. "Then we will get to know each other. First, you need to recover your strength. Can you eat something? I have made broth." She nodded, and Yates helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back. She was too weak to hold the bowl herself, so he fed her spoonfuls of broth, patient and gentle, until she had managed half the bowl and waved away the rest. "That is enough for now," she said. "Thank you." As he set the bowl aside, she reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were thin and cold. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have sent me back to Philadelphia, washed your hands of the whole affair." Yates looked down at her small hand resting on his. "That thought never crossed my mind," he said. "You came all this way to be my wife. The least I can do is make sure you survive the journey." Over the following days, Beatrice grew stronger. She was able to stay awake for longer periods, to sit up without assistance, and eventually to take short walks around the cabin with Yates's arm supporting her. They talked during these recovery days, sharing the stories of their lives. Beatrice had been orphaned at 16 when her parents died in a fire. She had been taken in by an aunt who owned a dress shop in Philadelphia, learning the seamstress trade. But her aunt had passed away the previous winter, leaving Beatrice alone and with few prospects. The dress shop had been sold to pay debts, and Beatrice had found herself facing a choice between working in one of the city's factories or seeking a new life elsewhere. I had always dreamed of the West, she confessed one afternoon as they sat together by the fire. My father used to read me stories about the frontier, about wide open spaces and new beginnings. When I saw the advertisement for the matrimonial agency, it felt like fate. Yates shared his own history. He had been a young soldier during the war, had seen terrible things that still haunted his dreams. After the fighting ended, he had drifted for several years before making his way to Montana Territory in 1873. He had worked as a ranch hand, saved his money, and eventually purchased his own land. For years, the solitude had been a balm to his war-torn spirit, but slowly, the loneliness had begun to weigh on him. "I am not much of a talker," he admitted. "I have lived alone for so long that I have forgotten how to be around people most of the time. But your letters, they made me remember what it was like to share thoughts with someone, to look forward to something." Beatrice smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face light up. "Your letters were what gave me courage to make this journey. You wrote about this land with such love, such poetry. I wanted to see it through your eyes." 2 weeks after her arrival, Dr. Thornton declared Beatrice well enough that his regular visits were no longer necessary. "She is still weak and needs to build her strength back up," he told Yates. "But the pneumonia has cleared. She is a fortunate young woman." "And you did an excellent job caring for her, Morrison." After the doctor left, Yates and Beatrice faced each other awkwardly in the cabin. For days, their relationship had been that of nurse and patient, with clear boundaries and purposes. Now, they had to navigate more uncertain territory. "I suppose we should discuss our arrangement," Beatrice said, sitting in the chair by the fire. She had dressed in one of her own dresses that morning, a simple gray cotton that hung loosely on her frame. "You have fulfilled more than your duty to me, Mr. Morrison. If you have changed your mind about the marriage, I will understand. Perhaps I could find work in town or return east." The thought of her leaving created an unexpected ache in Yates's chest. Over the past 2 weeks, he had grown accustomed to her presence. The cabin felt alive in a way it never had before. He found himself listening for her voice, noticing the small things she did, like humming while she worked at simple tasks, or the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. "I have not changed my mind," he said firmly. "But you should take time to be sure of your own feelings. You have been through an ordeal. You should not make such an important decision while you are still recovering." Beatrice met his eyes steadily. "I came here to marry you, Mr. Morrison. That has not changed, unless you find me unsuitable." "Yates," he said. "Please call me Yates, and I could never find you unsuitable. You are brave and kind and stronger than you know. But Beatrice, I want you to be certain. Marriage is permanent, and I will not trap you in a life you do not want." "Then let us make an agreement," she proposed. "Give me another month to recover my full strength and to learn about life here on your ranch. At the end of that time, if we both still wish to marry, we will have Reverend Mitchell come out and perform the ceremony. Does that seem fair?" It was more than fair. It gave them both time and space to be sure. Yates extended his hand, and Beatrice shook it, her grip firmer than it had been days before. "Agreed." The month that followed was the happiest Yates could remember in years. He showed Beatrice around the ranch, teaching her about the cattle and the horses. She was a quick learner, unafraid of hard work. She took over the cooking, and Yates discovered that she had a talent for making even simple ingredients into satisfying meals. The cabin began to feel like a home, with small touches that reflected her presence. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains she sewed for the windows, the scent of baking bread. They worked side by side, repairing fences, tending the garden, caring for the animals. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, or read aloud from the few books Yates owned. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, and Yates marveled at how natural it felt. He found himself falling in love with her, not in a sudden, overwhelming rush, but in a gradual deepening of feeling. He loved the way she laughed at his rare attempts at humor. He loved her determination to master new skills, even when she failed the first few times. He loved the compassion she showed to every living creature, from the barn cats to the chickens to the cattle. He loved the way she looked in the morning with her hair loose around her shoulders, and the way she hummed old songs while she worked. One evening, about 3 weeks into their agreement, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beatrice had been quiet all day, and Yates sensed she had something on her mind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was thinking about how different my life is now compared to what it was in Philadelphia. How much fuller it feels, even though the work is harder and the conditions more primitive. I was thinking about how strange it is that I feel more at home here after 3 weeks than I ever did in the city where I was born." Yates's heart began to beat faster. "And how do you feel about that?" She turned to look at him, her gray eyes serious. "I feel grateful. I feel like I have been given a second chance at life, and I feel like I am ready to make my decision if you are ready to hear it. I am ready. I want to marry you, Yates Morrison, not because it was the original plan and not because I have no other options. I want to marry you because over these past weeks I have come to care for you deeply. I have seen your kindness and your strength. I have seen the way you treat everything in your care with respect and gentleness. I have seen your heart, and it is a good heart. I would be honored to be your wife." Yates felt emotion swell in his chest, tightening his throat. "Beatrice," he said, his voice rough, "I have spent so many years alone, convinced that I was better off that way, but you have shown me what I was missing. You have brought light and life into this place. I am in love with you, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Yes, I want to marry you, more than anything." He reached for her hand, and she gave it to him. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, their fingers intertwined, and Yates felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before the war. They were married 2 days later in the little church in Fort Benton. Reverend Mitchell performed the ceremony, and Dr. Thornton and his wife stood as witnesses. Beatrice wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Yates had bought in town, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Yates wore his best suit, brushed clean of dust and pressed with care. As he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and she placed a matching one on his, Yates felt the weight of his loneliness finally lift. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and told him he could kiss his bride, Yates cupped Beatrice's face in his hands and kissed her with all the tenderness and promise he could convey. They celebrated with a simple dinner at the hotel restaurant, joined by the few friends Yates had in town. Then they drove back to the ranch as the stars came out, the wagon rattling along the familiar road. Beatrice leaned against Yates's shoulder, and he marveled at the fact that she was now his wife, that he had the right to hold her and protect her for the rest of his days. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Yates had to relearn how to share his space and his life with another person. Beatrice had to adapt to the physical demands of ranch life and the isolation of living so far from town. But they worked through each challenge together, learning to communicate, to compromise, to support each other. Beatrice proved herself invaluable to the running of the ranch. She took over not just the household duties, but also began managing the financial records, her neat handwriting filling ledgers with income and expenses. She learned to ride, tentatively at first and then with growing confidence, so she could accompany Yates when he checked on the cattle in far pastures. She started a larger garden, expanding beyond vegetables to include herbs for medicine and cooking. Yates, in turn, worked to make the ranch more comfortable for her. He built the second bedroom he had planned, though they had no need for it yet, using it instead as a sewing room where Beatrice could pursue her craft. He installed a better stove that made cooking easier and more efficient. He built a proper wash house so Beatrice did not have to do laundry in the creek. Every improvement he made was an expression of his love, a way of showing her how much her happiness mattered to him. Their physical relationship deepened gradually, built on trust and affection. Yates was patient and gentle, mindful of Beatrice's inexperience, and she responded with a passion that surprised and delighted them both. They learned each other's bodies with the same careful attention they brought to everything else in their relationship, creating an intimacy that strengthened their bond. As winter approached, they prepared for the harsh Montana weather, laying in supplies and buttoning up the ranch against the cold. Yates felt a satisfaction he had never known in previous winters, knowing he would not face the long, dark months alone. They spent evenings by the fire, Beatrice sewing while Yates carved wood or repaired tack, talking about their plans for the future. "I would like to expand the herd next spring," Yates said one night. "With the money we made from the fall sale, we could afford to purchase another 20 head. If we can build the herd up over the next few years, we might be able to hire on a few more hands and really make something of this place." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Beatrice agreed. "And I have been thinking about offering my sewing services in town. There are women who would pay well for a skilled seamstress, especially for special occasions. It could bring in additional income." They discussed the possibilities, making plans and dreaming together. Yates loved this, the partnership aspect of their marriage, the way they built their future together. In December, a heavy snowstorm trapped them in the cabin for nearly a week. Yates worried that Beatrice might find the isolation oppressive, but she seemed to relish the enforced intimacy. They spent the time in companionable domesticity, taking care of necessary chores and then returning to the warmth of the cabin to read, talk, and make love. It was during one of these snowbound days that Beatrice first mentioned children. "You want to be a father?" she asked, sitting across from him at the table where they had just finished lunch. Yates considered the question carefully. He had not allowed himself to think much about children, even after they married. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. "I do," he said finally. "I think I would like that very much, but only if you want to be a mother. It is your body that would bear the burden." Beatrice smiled softly. "I have always wanted children. I used to dream about it when I was alone in Philadelphia, wondering if I would ever have the chance. Now that I have found you and this life, I think I am ready. If it happens, I would be very happy." "Then I would be happy too," Yates said, reaching across the table to take her hand. 2 months later, in February of 1883, Beatrice woke feeling ill. At first, they both feared she had caught another respiratory infection, the memory of her arrival still vivid in their minds. But as the days passed and the pattern of her symptoms became clear, Dr. Thornton confirmed what they had begun to suspect. Beatrice was pregnant. Yates was overcome with emotion when Thornton gave them the news. He pulled Beatrice into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face. "I am beyond happy," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I am carrying our child, Yates. Our family is growing." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Beatrice suffered from morning sickness for the first few months. Yates was attentive and worried, hovering over her until she laughingly shooed him away. As spring arrived and the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, Beatrice's belly grew round. Yates found himself mesmerized by the changes in her body, the visible proof of the life they had created together. He became even more protective, insisting she avoid heavy lifting and dangerous tasks. Beatrice protested at first but eventually accepted his care with good grace, understanding it came from love rather than a desire to control her. They spent the spring and summer preparing for the baby's arrival. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was soft as silk. Beatrice sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face glowing with contentment as she worked. They converted the sewing room into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Timothy's wife, a cheerful young woman named Sarah who had married him that spring, became Beatrice's close friend. Sarah had assisted at several births and promised to be there when Beatrice's time came. The two women spent many afternoons together, Sarah sharing wisdom about childbirth and infant care, while Beatrice taught her more advanced sewing techniques. In early October, on a crisp autumn morning, Beatrice's labor began. Yates sent Timothy racing to town for Dr. Thornton while he stayed with Beatrice, holding her hand and trying to hide his terror. Sarah arrived within the hour, calm and efficient, and took charge of the situation. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched on and Beatrice's pain intensified, Yates felt helpless and afraid. He had faced enemy soldiers without flinching, had survived wounds and hardship, but nothing had prepared him for watching the woman he loved suffer. "You are doing so well," he murmured, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." "I do not feel strong," Beatrice gasped between contractions. "I feel like I am being torn apart." "You can do this," Yates said firmly. "I believe in you." Dr. Thornton arrived just as the sun was setting, and his presence brought a measure of relief. He examined Beatrice and pronounced that everything was progressing normally, if slowly. Sarah and the doctor worked together while Yates stayed at Beatrice's side, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones ached, murmuring encouragement and love. Finally, as the moon rose high in the sky, their son was born. The baby's cry filled the cabin, and Yates felt tears stream down his face as Thornton placed the squirming, red-faced infant in Beatrice's arms. "A boy," the doctor announced. "A healthy boy." Beatrice looked down at their son with wonder and then up at Yates with a smile that nearly broke his heart with its beauty. "We have a son," she whispered. Yates touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling as miniature fingers wrapped around his calloused one. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you both more than words can say." They named him William, after Yates's father who had died when Yates was young. Little William Morrison proved to be a hungry, vocal infant who kept them awake at all hours, but Yates did not mind the exhaustion. He loved watching Beatrice nurse their son, loved the way she hummed lullabies in the middle of the night, loved the weight of the baby in his arms as he paced the cabin floor soothing William back to sleep. The first year of William's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. First smiles, first teeth, first words. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates expanded the herd as planned, and Beatrice's sewing business grew, with women from Fort Benton and beyond seeking her services. They worked hard but felt blessed beyond measure. When William was 18 months old, Beatrice became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Beatrice's mother, was born in the spring of 1885. Margaret was a calm baby, content to watch the world with solemn blue eyes so like her father's. Yates marveled at his growing family. The cabin that had once seemed so empty now rang with children's laughter and the sounds of life. He and Beatrice worked together to manage the ranch and raise their children, their partnership as strong as ever. As the years passed, their love deepened and matured. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about how to handle various situations on the ranch or with the children. But they had learned to talk through their differences, to listen to each other, to compromise. The foundation of trust and affection they had built during those early days when Yates nursed Beatrice back to health had proven unshakable. In the summer of 1887, when William was nearly 4 and Margaret was 2, Beatrice suggested they take a trip to town for the Independence Day celebration. It would be the first time they had all gone to Fort Benton together as a family, and Yates found himself looking forward to showing off his wife and children. The celebration was held in the town square with speeches, music, and a large picnic. William ran around with the other children while Margaret clung to Beatrice's skirts, overwhelmed by the crowd. Yates stood with his arm around his wife, watching their son play, and felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened him. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked, looking up at him with those gray eyes that still had the power to make his heart skip. "I was thinking about how different my life is now from what it was 5 years ago," Yates said. "I was thinking about how you arrived sick and weak, and how terrified I was that I would lose you before I ever really knew you. I was thinking about how falling in love with you was the easiest and best thing I have ever done." Beatrice leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I was thinking similar thoughts, about how I was so frightened when I made this journey, not knowing if I was making a terrible mistake. About how the pneumonia seemed like a disaster but turned out to be a blessing because it gave us time to truly know each other before we married. About how grateful I am every single day that I found you." Yates kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Around them, the celebration continued, but for a moment, it was just the two of them, remembering and grateful. That evening, as they drove home with the children asleep in the back of the wagon, Beatrice said, "I think I might be pregnant again." Yates glanced at her in surprise and delight. "Are you certain?" "Not certain, but I have my suspicions. I will know for sure in a few weeks." Another child. Their family growing again. Yates found himself grinning like a fool. "How do you feel about it?" "Happy," Beatrice said simply. "Tired at the prospect of another pregnancy and another infant, but happy. Our home has so much love in it, Yates. There is room for more." She was right. In January of 1888, they welcomed another son, James. And 2 years after that, twin girls, Elizabeth and Catherine, completed their family. The cabin had to be expanded again and again to accommodate their growing brood, until it was no longer really a cabin but a substantial house. Yates hired more help for the ranch, men he trusted who were good with the cattle and respectful toward his family. Timothy remained his right-hand man, and the two families grew close, their children playing together and the adults supporting each other through the challenges of frontier life. Beatrice's sewing business evolved. She began training some of the younger women in town, passing on her skills and creating a small cooperative that benefited everyone involved. She also started teaching the girls in the area, holding informal classes in her home where she instructed them not just in sewing but in reading and arithmetic as well. Yates watched with pride as his wife became a pillar of their community. She had a gift for bringing people together, for seeing what was needed and finding ways to meet those needs. The shy, sick young woman who had arrived on that stagecoach had blossomed into a confident, capable woman whose impact reached far beyond their ranch. The children thrived. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father with the cattle. Margaret was creative and gentle, with a talent for music that Beatrice encouraged by purchasing a small piano when Margaret was 7. James was adventurous and bold, always exploring and getting into mischief. The twins, Elizabeth and Catherine, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in a language all their own. Yates loved being a father. He loved teaching his sons to ride and rope, loved reading to his daughters before bed, loved the chaos and noise and constant activity that defined their household. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he thought back to his solitary life before Beatrice and could hardly recognize the man he had been. As the children grew older and more independent, Yates and Beatrice found time for each other again. They would take evening walks together, hand in hand, discussing everything and nothing. Sometimes they would ride out to a favorite spot by the creek and sit together watching the water flow, comfortable in the silence that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked one evening in the fall of 1895. They were sitting on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the prairie. Their children were inside, the older ones helping the younger with homework and chores. "Regret what?" Beatrice asked, though he suspected she knew exactly what he meant. "Leaving Philadelphia. Coming west to marry a stranger. This life is hard, Beatrice. I know it has not been easy." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was firm and clear. "I have never regretted it for a single moment. This life we have built together, this family, this love we share, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. Yes, the work is hard. Yes, there have been challenges and sorrows. But Yates, when I look at what we have created together, when I see our children and this ranch and the community we are part of, I feel nothing but gratitude and joy. You gave me a home when I arrived sick and helpless. You gave me your care and your kindness long before you gave me your love. And every day since then, you have shown me through your actions what it means to be truly cherished. How could I ever regret that?" Yates reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together just as they had on that first evening when they decided to marry. "I fell in love with you while I was nursing you back to health," he confessed. "I would sit by your bed and watch you sleep and feel this overwhelming need to protect you, to keep you safe. And then, as you recovered and I got to know you, that protectiveness turned into something deeper. I had been alone for so long, Beatrice. I had forgotten what it felt like to need someone, to want to share every moment with them. You taught me how to love again." "We taught each other," Beatrice corrected gently. "You showed me what real strength looks like. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet strength of someone who does what needs to be done without complaint. You showed me what it means to be a true partner. And you have been the most wonderful father to our children. They are lucky to have you, just as I am." They sat together as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of their children inside the house, holding hands and counting their blessings. The years had left their marks on both of them. Yates had more gray in his hair, and Beatrice had laugh lines around her eyes. But their love had only grown stronger with time. As the new century approached, their children began to grow up and forge their own paths. William, at 17, showed every sign of wanting to take over the ranch someday. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's head for business. Margaret, at 15, was courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a polite young man named Daniel who clearly adored her. Yates felt the bittersweet pang of knowing his daughter would marry and leave home someday, but he was glad she had found someone worthy of her. James, at 12, talked of becoming a lawman, inspired by the stories he had heard about the frontier marshals. The twins, at 10, were still young enough to be simply children, not yet worried about the future. One winter evening in 1899, Yates and Beatrice sat by the fire in their bedroom, the house quiet around them for once. Beatrice was mending one of James's shirts, and Yates was reading the newspaper that had come from Helena. "Listen to this," Yates said. "They are saying the frontier is officially closed. The Wild West, as they call it, is coming to an end." Beatrice looked up from her sewing. "What do you think about that?" Yates considered. "I think times change. When I came to Montana Territory, it was wild and dangerous. Now we have schools and churches, law and order. In some ways it is better, safer for our children, but there is something lost too, I suppose. A certain freedom, a sense of possibility." "We made our possibilities real," Beatrice said. "We built this ranch from almost nothing. We created a family and a life worth living. That had nothing to do with the frontier being wild or settled. That was about us choosing to work together, to love each other, to build something lasting." She was right, as she so often was. The external circumstances of their lives had changed dramatically over the years, but the core of their relationship remained constant. They were partners, lovers, best friends. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, had celebrated joys and endured sorrows, and through it all, their love had been the foundation on which everything else was built. As the new century dawned, Yates Morrison was 62 years old and Beatrice was 51. They had been married for 17 years, though Yates still sometimes woke in the morning and felt a flash of surprise and gratitude that she was there beside him. They had 5 children, a thriving ranch, and a place in their community that they had earned through years of hard work and generous service. One spring morning in 1900, Beatrice came to find Yates in the barn where he was checking on a mare about to foal. She had a letter in her hand and a strange expression on her face. "What is it?" Yates asked, immediately concerned. "A letter from the matrimonial agency," Beatrice said, "the one that arranged our match. They are writing to all their successful couples, gathering stories for a book they are publishing about frontier marriages." Yates came to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. The letter was asking them to share how they met and how their marriage had turned out, as an encouragement to others considering making similar arrangements. "What do you think?" Beatrice asked. "Should we respond?" Yates thought about it. About that day in September 18 years ago, when a sick young woman had arrived on the stagecoach and changed his life forever. About the nights he had sat by her bed, terrified of losing her before he ever really knew her. About the slow, beautiful process of falling in love. About the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that sustained them both. "Yes," he said. "I think we should tell our story. If it can give hope to someone else who is lonely and looking for a new start, then it is worth sharing." They wrote the letter together that evening, taking turns at the desk, adding details and memories, laughing at some recollections and growing quiet at others. They wrote about the pneumonia and the long recovery, about the month they had given themselves to be sure of their feelings, about the moment they knew they wanted to marry. They wrote about the challenges of frontier life and the joys of raising a family. They wrote about love and partnership and the courage it takes to build a life with another person. At the end of the letter, Yates added one final paragraph. "When I sent for a mail-order bride, I was looking for companionship and help on my ranch. What I found was infinitely more precious. I found my soulmate, my partner, my best friend." Beatrice arrived sick and weak, and in nursing her back to health, I discovered the deepest love I have ever known. Our marriage has not always been easy, but it has always been worth it. If I could go back to that day in 1882 and choose again, I would make the same choice in a heartbeat. Love is worth the risk, always. Beatrice read what he had written and tears filled her eyes. "That is beautiful," she whispered. "It is true," Yates said simply. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Every word. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but also deep contentment. William took over more of the ranch operations as Yates gradually stepped back, proud of his son's skill and dedication. Margaret married her Daniel in a beautiful ceremony at their ranch, and within a year, presented Yates and Beatrice with their first grandchild, a boy named Yates after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Yates felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. He was no longer the lonely cowboy waiting at the stage depot, no longer the frightened man nursing a sick woman back to health. He was a husband, father, and now grandfather, surrounded by love and family, his life full beyond measure. James did indeed become a lawman, though he stayed in Montana rather than seeking adventure elsewhere. The twins both married local men and settled near enough to visit regularly, filling the ranch house with grandchildren on holidays and special occasions. As Yates entered his 70s, his health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for many years. Beatrice remained strong and vital, and she cared for him with the same tenderness and devotion he had shown her all those years ago when she arrived sick. "We have come full circle," Yates said one evening as Beatrice helped him into bed. His joints ached from a day spent riding, something he could no longer do without paying for it afterward. "How so?" Beatrice asked, settling beside him. "You caring for me now just as I cared for you when you first arrived. Seems fitting somehow." Beatrice took his hand, her grip still firm despite the years. "The difference is that when you cared for me, you barely knew me. You did it out of duty and decency. I care for you out of love and a lifetime of partnership. You are my heart, Yates Morrison. I will care for you for as long as I draw breath." Yates raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I am the luckiest man who ever lived," he said. "To have found you, to have loved you, to have built this life with you. I have no regrets, Beatrice, not a single one." "Nor do I," she replied, leaning down to kiss him softly. "We have had a good life, my love, a very good life." They had several more good years together. Yates lived to see more grandchildren born, to watch his ranch prosper under William's management, to celebrate anniversaries and birthdays surrounded by the family he and Beatrice had created. He spent his final years in peace and contentment, grateful for every moment. When Yates Morrison passed away in his sleep in the spring of 1910 at the age of 73, he died with Beatrice's hand in his and a smile on his face. He had lived a long life, witnessed tremendous changes in the world around him, but the constant had always been the woman beside him. Beatrice grieved deeply, as one does when losing a soulmate, but she also celebrated the life they had shared. At his funeral, attended by their children, grandchildren, and what seemed like half of Fort Benton, she spoke about their love story. She told about arriving sick and helpless, about the lonely cowboy who had nursed her back to health, about the gradual, beautiful process of falling in love. "Yates gave me everything," she told the assembled mourners. "A home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, a love that sustained me through every trial. He was a good man, the best man I have ever known. And I am grateful beyond words that I had the courage to answer that advertisement all those years ago to make that journey west to marry a stranger. Because that stranger became my beloved husband, and our marriage was the greatest blessing of my life." Beatrice lived another 12 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She remained active and engaged, still teaching young women to sew, still managing the financial aspects of the ranch, still contributing to her community. But she spoke often of Yates, keeping his memory alive through stories and reminiscences. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1922 at the age of 73, the same age Yates had been when he died, her children found letters among her possessions. Letters from their courtship, carefully preserved, along with the story Yates and Beatrice had written to the matrimonial agency. At the bottom of the stack was a final letter, written in Beatrice's hand just days before her death. To my children and grandchildren, it read, I want you to know that the love your grandfather and I shared was real and deep and lasting. It began in the most unlikely circumstances, with me arriving sick and your grandfather taking care of me, a stranger who was supposed to become his wife. But from that difficult beginning grew the most beautiful partnership I could have imagined. We were not perfect people and our marriage was not perfect, but it was real. It was built on mutual respect, honest communication, shared work, and most of all, love. That love sustained us through hard times and made good times even better. It gave us you, our children, and through you, our grandchildren. What more could anyone ask of a life? I go to my rest content and grateful, eager to be reunited with the man who was my heart for so many years. Remember us. Remember our love, and know that it is possible to find happiness in the most unexpected places if you are brave enough to take the risk. The children gathered together and decided to keep the ranch in the family, honoring the legacy their parents had built. William's children took over operations, and the Morrison Ranch continued to thrive for generations, always remembered as the place where a lonely cowboy and a sick mail-order bride had found love and built a life together. The story of Yates and Beatrice Morrison became part of local lore, told and retold in Fort Benton and the surrounding area. It was a story about courage and compassion, about taking chances on love, about the way two people from different worlds could come together and create something beautiful. It was a story about the real Wild West, not the gunfights and outlaws of legend, but the ordinary people who built lives and families and communities through hard work and determination. And at its heart, it was a love story. A story about a lonely cowboy who nursed a sick mail-order bride back to health, and in the process, discovered a love that would last a lifetime. It was a story about two people who chose each other again and again, through good times and bad, building a partnership that stood the test of time. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that love, real love, is worth fighting for, worth working for, and worth celebrating. Years after both Yates and Beatrice had passed, their great-granddaughter found their photograph, the one taken on their 20th wedding anniversary. In it, Yates stood tall and proud, his arm around Beatrice, who leaned into him with a smile that radiated happiness. Even in the faded photograph, the love between them was palpable, undeniable, eternal. The great-granddaughter had the photograph restored and framed, hanging it in a place of honor in the ranch house that still stood on the land Yates had claimed so long ago. Below it, she placed a small plaque with words taken from the letter Beatrice had written. True love is possible in the most unexpected places, if you are brave enough to take the risk. It stood as a testament to a love story that began when a mail-order bride showed up sick. A lonely cowboy nursed her back to health, and together they built a life that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come. Their love had started in the hardship of illness and the uncertainty of marrying strangers, but it had grown into something extraordinary, a partnership that enriched not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. The Wild West may have closed, the frontier may have faded into history, but the love story of Yates Morrison and Beatrice Vaughn Morrison lived on, a reminder that the most powerful force in any era, any place, any circumstance, is the love between two people who choose to face life together. Their story was proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most difficult beginnings, that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that two people committed to each other can overcome any obstacle. As the sun set over the Montana prairie where they had built their life together, where they had raised their children and created their legacy, the land itself seemed to remember them. The creek still flowed where they used to sit together in the evenings. The house still stood, expanded and modernized but built on the foundation of that original cabin. The cattle still grazed on the rolling hills they had loved so much. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Yates Morrison and Beatrice Vaughn Morrison were together again, their love transcending even death, eternal and unbreakable, just as it had been from that September day in 1882, when a sick young woman arrived on a stagecoach and a lonely cowboy opened his heart and his home, never imagining that he was welcoming the great love of his life.